Hi, I'm Mr. Miyagi, and this is Mr. Miyagi's shop. Okay, well, you can see I've got a little bit opened up here. I remember back in a couple episodes back, I was talking about when I started the bike that I couldn't get it to go into first gear right, so I was going to check the clutch and everything. So I ended up popping this off and changing out the clutch plates and making sure that those were all set. Got that, put it all back together, put oil in it, and adjusted the clutch. And it still didn't seem, still couldn't get it in first gear without going up into second, back down, and kind of forcing it into first gear. Then I ended up readjusting the clutch again, hoping that that would resolve it because of clutch drag. It still wouldn't go in properly. So again, I changed out the clutch lever up here, the whole mechanism, and put on a proper one. The one I was using was off of a Honda 750, and it worked somewhat, but it didn't work proper. So I put on the right one, readjusted the clutch, tried it out. The lever works really well. The clutch lever works just fine. But I still had a hard time of getting it into first gear. All right, I'm at the stage now where I have to pull the motor. And I didn't want to, but here I am. So to get to this stage, first things that I needed to do was remove the seat, remove the side covers, remove the tank, disconnect your battery. Very important. Disconnect it. Disconnect the wire to the starter. Remove all the wiring like spark plug wires, ignition wiring system, which when I go back this time, when I wired it the first time, I didn't put any quick plugs on it, and now I will. And then, you want to remove all your mounts, your side kick stuff and everything. What I did is, since I'm going to be into this engine anyway, is I drained the engine and let it drain overnight so that good and clear of oil. And if you're going to take those plugs off the bottom, I used a 1 1/16 wrench. This is pretty good. And what I ended up doing is I removed both of these plugs. There's two under there, and it just helped drain it all the way. I put the plugs back in because that way I know where they're at, and they're on tight, and it's easier to do it while the motor is in the frame. One of the other things I did is I moved the left-hand side case cover off of it because this makes it difficult to get through, and you need to remove the clutch cable. This has all been pulled back, all the electric's been pulled back, unplugged from the regulator, that's been set back. I also removed the chain and sprocket. One of the reasons is I'm going to be splitting the cases. I don't need this on, and it's much easier to remove the sprocket when the chain is on, because then your wheel will lock it, so when you unscrew the nut, it comes off a lot easier, so you don't have to fight it. I'll do the same thing when I put it back together. I just wanted to make sure that I have everything clear. All the mounts have been removed. Back mount, top mount, front mount. I have two more bolts that I have to pull out to get this unit out. Now I've made a little lift point up here on the engine, and we'll go into a little bit more detail on that when I get the engine out. We have our little lift point right here. So how do I get this motor out? Well, let me show you. I've made this overhead system It's a roller. The whole roll this way, and it rolls just like that. You don't need this big weight scale, but I usually do it just so I can figure out the weight of the bikes and how much that engine weighs. Well, I can tell you, I think it's about 150 pounds. All right, so now what we want to do is we want to take a little pressure off those bolts. You go to the other side here, I got to pull the bolt. This is the lower rear bolt. And now we're going to pull the bottom center bolt. Okay. Just like that. Now the motor is hanging there on its own. So what we're going to do is slightly lift it. One of the little tricks that I learned, block this out a little bit, and then you should be able to jockey this around just a hair. These Yamaha frames are a bit tight for getting these motors in. You know, I should have left those plugs off. Put it on. Now we're going to put this on our mobile stand. So what I have is my rolling stand here. Okay, now we have it on our rolling stand. I'm going to move it over to the work area. What I'm doing here, I ended up making this rear mount so that I don't have to pop the cylinders and everything off, and I can roll the engine over. So I basically just made so that it accepts everything here, and we will snug this down. All right, good and tight. So what this allows me to do now is now we can take this motor and turn it upside down so I can work on it. There you have it. What we're going to end up having to do now is we're going to have to pull this bottom part of the case off. So I'm going to take a break here and get set up for it. Okay, we're going to remove the charging system. If you don't have one of these little pullers, you should get one. They really make a big difference. These are a great little tool, and I believe you can get them at Mike's XS. I think I got mine years ago, so I'm not sure where I actually got it. Now I'm going to remove the charging system here. That's your chain guard for your shifter. Now I've upgraded this engine with the new 200 watt charging system. puts out about a little over 16.5 amps, 17 amps. Really helps in charging. Now we have to remove all the bolts and the nuts. So now we have to remove the starter, and we'll need to remove the clutch housing. Because there's a bolt right there. That's number 13 nut, excuse me. Will my beautiful assistant reach behind her and grab one of those little magnets hanging down? That just helps get these little ones out of there. Okay, will my assistant hand me my screw gun there? Thank you. Just makes it easier. Keep it. So now we're going to remove the clutch housing, and if you don't know how to do that, you're going to find out. Very important piece. Do not lose this. Do not lose this piece. You need that.
And what's that piece called?
That piece is for disengaging the clutch. It's what the push rod sits against. All right. So we need to remove that nut, and I believe that is that's a 27 millimeter. And then this just lifts right off. And you don't want to lose this stuff back here. There's a little shim and another spacer right in here. Shim first, and then the spacer. And in this process, what we'll do is I'll show you the upgrade bearing for this when we get ready to put this all back together again. I don't want this in our way, so I'm going to go ahead and pull the kickstart mechanism. Whoa, almost get hit in the face with that one. That just opens everything up, makes it a little easier to do. So, where are we at now? We are at the point of pulling this unit, which is the shifter unit. See that little snap ring right there? That has to be removed. And then we need our special tool. And then there's a little spacer washer there. It comes out and goes in there. All right. One of the other things you need to do is you also need to make sure that you pulled the copper washers on the bottom of this. That just helps seal the engine. So now we're going to go back, laying the motor over. We're going to pull this mechanism out. And on this, all you have to do is just lift straight out. Push that back, pull right up, and there's your shifter. The shaft. Okay, we have one more bolt that goes right in here that we have to remove. But in order to get that, we have to remove this gear from the starter mechanism. Okay, remove the clip, put it somewhere safe. Now this is the starter gear, and you need to pop this off, and there's two little hidden half clips. These come out so easily. This is where we found a problem on the fourth gear shifting fork. Let me hold it at there. Can you see it? There. Lots of wear. And another problem was the fact that there's some bent pins and they're kind of wore. I thought maybe just straightening these out would have fixed it, but it looks like somebody was jamming through the gears. I think the guy originally tried to race this motor and ultimately screwed up some parts. We still have some wear on the center one, which isn't bad, but I ended up changing out all of this, the gears and everything. One of the other things I did is on the other setup is I changed out this fifth gear pinion gear to, this is a 23 tooth, and we went to a 24 tooth. Now let's move over to the other one and I'll show you the difference here. You can see the cut of the gears here. They were able to put one more tooth in there just by recutting and relaying it out in the same size. Now this is fairly easy to get. You can get this. It gives you kind of an overdrive. But what you can do, this is fairly easy. Okay, so to get to that fifth gear pinion, remove the bearing, the outer little shim, pull the second gear pinion off, and the clip ring. It just slides off. You can put the new one on. Make sure you have your inner shim on and the outer shim on. You can see how this dog's in there. And this one here has got a little bit of wear on the inside, so it was a little sloppy, but I think it was still fairly good. That slides back down on, so if you were putting the new gear on, this would just slide on. You put the shim on, clip ring, lock that in place, make sure it's in the groove all the way on there. Slide your second gear pinion back on, your shim, your bearing, and you're all ready for high speed fifth gear. I think what we're going to move over to, and another little upgrade that I like to do, here's the starter gear. That's the original. They fit right on here. It just slides right in place. Well, you can see the difference in the new upgraded spring. A little bit more pressure, pops back a little better. So that just goes on. This just slides back into place. And then all you have to do now is insert it into the motor. The second upgrade I'd like to do is replace basically the clutch basket bearing setup, which is easy. These just come right out after you have them pulled, and they're right inside. Now you can see the difference in that. You've got a lot more bearing surface there, a little bit less flex in the basket itself. And this is just as easy to replace. I like to grease up or oil up my area. A little lube there. A lube there. And a little bit more lube there. So you have a back shim, a bearing, and you have a front shim that all goes in here. Now we'll be taking that apart and when we put the clutch back on, so it'll be a little easier. You can insert all this stuff. But that just keeps the flex out of the basket. It actually makes it ride much nicer, a little smoother on the shifting too. Later on, we'll get into doing installing the shift drum, getting that all set up. You can see this is basically how it goes into the motor. And then you insert your your cam followers, which actually ride in these grooves, and that's what indicates when this drum turns, it moves it around to whatever gear that we need to have it in. So I've got my followers, and new cotter pins. Always, I cannot stress this enough. Replace those cotter pins. We're going to work on installing the shift drum. Normally what I do when I quit for the evening, I like to cover up my project. You don't have to use a Mickey Mouse blankie to cover it up with, but if you're kind of a Mickey Mouse job, it's a it's a good way to go. So anyway, we'll move this out of the way. Okay, we have our drum. We want to locate the divot, the indent, because that lines up with that indent. We're going to put this in as such. We're going to grab number 3. Now, if you look, my wife pointed this out, my lovely wife, that there are numbers on here, and the third one, it says 3 right there. On the 4th number back, it says number 3. That slides on. Now we're going to grab number 2. And number 1. This just all slides together now. What I want to do is I want to get this in a situation where I can put my cam followers in. They just slide in. You want to make sure that they drop into the groove there. We put in a cotter pin. Now we're going to need to bend this. Okay, so we're going to reach in here, which isn't sometimes the easiest thing to do. So the only other tool I have is, a lot of yous will understand what this tool is. In the medical field or
hemostat.
Then you want to take these and get them up flat against the fork. All right. So now we'll move on to the second one. Want to make sure that's in the groove. This may help a little bit to flatten that out against the, there we go. All right, that's locked in. Going for the last one. All right, so that all fits in there. Now we have a slide shaft that goes on. You want to make sure you put that in the right way. This notch has to be on the outside. Put a little lubricant on this. That all just slides right in there. And I did a mistake. Do you see the problem? The head of the cotter pin is on the wrong side. Hopefully I can pull that without
having to undo the rest, yeah.
Well, at least this one here. But I did buy extra cotter pins. You want to make sure that this cotter pin comes in from this direction, because if it's coming in from the other side, it will block this gear, this fork, from coming together. When these come together, there's limited clearance in there for that to work. So if you had the head of the cotter pin sticking out on this side, it would stop it. So it wouldn't shift properly, wouldn't go into gear. So it's something to pay attention to. And it's one of the real important things to do is to make sure that you test this, to make sure that everything is working properly, that the forks are moving and there's no bindage. These are only going to go so far because they'll go to the end of their stop. And it depends on what gear and everything you're in. Double check that before you get any further down the line. Okay, we're at the stage now where we need to install the plate stop. It goes on to the shift drum. And then on the guide bar for the forks, there's a little notch in the guide bar. You want to make sure you line that up so everything goes together. What we want to do now is we want to put on a locking plate and the two screws. Hold this all together. I just put those down fairly loose. I'll tighten them up here in a minute. Now we're going to put on the plate roller. I usually use my handy dandy tool for this. Flip this down into place. And that locks right in that little spring catch there. This comes around, hooks in to the roller. You have to work it around a little bit, but it's not all that difficult. Now this is set so that that circle right there actually goes on the outside of that. So what we're going to end up doing now, you got to play with that a little bit. That is a 12. We'll run that down until we can fit it into the hole properly. So now we're down on the stage there. So what we want to do, we want to work this. This sits right in there and then lines up and screws down. Okay, and we will tighten up these two small bolts. And we'll bend up the edges. And now you're set in place. One thing else that we're going to put in also at this time is the detent. Neutral slides into the hole, and cap and spring go in and hold it in place. And that gets tightened down. All right. So we'll roll the engine back over. Now you want to make sure that this is in neutral when you're putting your gears together. You want to make for sure is you want to roll the shifting drum around till it meets up to the neutral switch down below. You can tell, and then it drops into this little, the detent drops into this spot right here, and it kind of locks in. Then you know you're in the neutral. So also at this time, it's a good idea to put the seals in that you're going to use. These have a lipped edge that will fit down into the little groove here, and you're placing your gear on, making sure that you get this snap ring lodged in the little spot for over on this side here, lining everything up with dogs, and then she should drop in just like that. We also have this little ring here that we want to make sure fits in this groove there, and we line up the other dogs, the other forks. And everything should just drop right down into place. You may have to wiggle it a little bit, and then it'll go in and set. Now at this time is usually what I like to do is to put a little bit of lube on the slides areas here for right now. We will put more gear lube on, but right now what I want to do is I want to check the shifting. So that's first. That's neutral. That's second. That's third. That's fourth. And that's fifth. Downshift. Fourth, third, second, first gear, and neutral. So now is a good time to apply some lubricant to everything on your gearing. And we'll go through the shifting again. First gear, neutral. Second, third, fourth, and fifth gear. When I was shifting gears, basically what I was doing is taking a pair of needle nose and applying it here so I could turn this shaft one way or the other, whether I wanted it to go through the gears and such. That's what I was doing. Now we're at the stage where we need to put some sealant on the case where they go together. One of the major thing is to make sure this is good and clean on here. I kind of like to use this backside. One thing I've done is I've pulled out the dowel pins and then inserted them in the engine side of the top side there, so when you drop it on, everything is aligned. This just makes it a little easier to put the glue and everything on. What I'm using is a liquid gasket, and it's 1194. I believe I got this through Mike's XS, but you don't have to apply a lot, but you do need to spread it out so it covers the areas. So what I usually do is I get it going in a little section here. This is kind of a semi-thickening or hardening. So what I'll do is I'll spread it out with a thin layer, and just take your time on laying it out. I just made up this little spreader from some excess metal that I had laying around the shop. You could use wood if you wanted to, plastic, whatever. Just want to make sure that you got a good coating on this stuff. Doesn't have to be real thick because it does spread out nicely. I like to apply a little bit of sealant right where the seals are at on the edge where they meet, just to ensure that there's going to be a good seal there. That just helps make it seal a little better. Okay. Now we're going to put this case, bottom part of the case on. You want to line up on the holes. And then everything should just drop right on. This is the part I don't like. Probably should have been wearing some gloves. That stuff is sticky. Now then, the next stage is just to go through and put your copper gaskets on where they're needed on the bottom side here. One at 14 pounds. So here again we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, double check this one here. 10, 11, make sure, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Okay, one of the things I like to do is just let it sit and then take the 14 and go back over everything again. And that just ensures that everything is an even torque. So I'll get back to you in a little bit. Okay, we're going to do the final check. But while I was waiting for this to settle a little bit, this crow's foot's okay, but I made a better one. You gotta love Harbor Freight. They got cheap tools. They're easy to turn into something else. So here's my version of a crow's foot. This is nice. This is a oh no, this is a Craftsman. But this is a Harbor Freight one I made, and I think it'll work a little better. Yeah. So anyway, what we're going to do now is we're going to do the torque. We're just going to walk back through at 14 pounds just to make sure. So we're starting off at 1 again. Good. 2. Good. 3. Good. 4. Good. 5. Good. 6. Good. 7. Good. 8. Good. Now we get to try out that crow's foot. Or number 9. Number 9, good. Number 10, good. 11, good. Going for 12. 12, good. 13, good. Go to 14. 14, good. 15, good. 16, good. 17. And 18. You never want to leave these sit long with under tension. Not good for your torque range. So we've gotten that completed. Now we can move on to the clutch and the kickstart and whatever else we can find out on this side here. So let me block this, tighten it up. Installing the clutch. One other thing I did before we get to the clutch is I did put in the shift arm with the pad and it adjusted this here. You have to adjust it off of that little screw, the screw down here, sorry. And you have to pull it back and forth. You want equal between these areas right here. You want it equal so that it shifts properly. I'm sorry I didn't show that. I'll maybe do that on another series. Okay, before we install the clutch basket, we need to install the starter gear for electric start. Well, that just drops down into place. Let's put a little lubricant on there, just to play it safe. This is the new style one. You just have to play with it a little bit. You can work it past the other drive gear. You want to make sure that that loop is down in there. There we go. Little catch ring. 2 half clips. Goes on one side. And goes on the other. A little cover that holds them all together. Now this is the upgraded starter gear with a heavier spring. Supposed to help performance on the starter. We'll see. Okay, so we have an inner spacer that goes on, and then we have the outer spacer that goes on. You want to make sure those are in place. So here's the inner hub shaft piece that goes on. And once again, we want to lubricate this. It just helps for the initial startup that you're not having any problems. All right, so that drops on. Now the hub comes down on there with our new bearing surfaces and everything. Outer shim, and then the hub. Clutch hub itself. Okay, next goes on. We have the locker. This one's kind of banged up a little bit, but we'll reuse it. Alright, so these are drop into the little grooves right there on each side of the clutch. And then the nut. Little clutch tool drops into place. All right. This was, I'm not really sure where I got this at. I think it was one of the swap meets. You can either make it out of an old plate or you can buy them online. So you want to bend these tabs up onto the flats so that this nut does not loosen up. Feeling good. And I'm inserting that ball bearing. And why I put the grease on there so it stay there, because I've got it tilted up like this so you can see it with a camera. Normally I would do it a little different. Now we're going to put in our little pong. That goes in. And I like to put just a little grease on there too. So we have a fiber plate that goes on. And if you look at them, they'll have kind of a roughed edge. I usually put roughed edge down. Same thing with the steel plates. The steel plates, the way they're stamped, you can tell this is the back side, this is the front side. Put those on. So then it's just back and forth between the plates. All right. Now there's a little indent right here. You see that little spot there? You want to line up that hole with that. So then your clutch will drop right on. Looks like we're at the stage to install the starter. Put a little lubricant on this one. Just helps to make it slide into the seal easier. These are fairly easy. You just wiggle them around and boom, they pop right in. Hopefully they pop right in. Not all the time. And it's the 4 bolts that go in here to hold it in place. And then it's just tighten it down. Now we're at the stage to install the motor. It's late. I'm not going to do that now. I'll do that tomorrow. So it's dark 30 outside and it's past my beer time. So we'll talk to you in the morning. I thought I'd go over this morning a few of the tools that helped me do the rebuild on the motor. Snap ring pliers, little picks, spring pulls, hammer, some forceps for the tight spots, maybe a punch, definitely a screwdriver, needle nose pliers, 5mm Allens, the crow's foot for the tight areas. If you got a chance and you have a buddy that has a welder, or if you have a welder, I would make up one of these little 12mm ones. Just buy some, go to the the cheap tool store, or maybe at a swap meet or whatever, and pick you up some scrap sockets and whatever. You can make a nice little unit for doing that. You'll definitely need a 12mm deep and a 10mm deep, which would help out. 22mm, the torque wrench especially, cleaning tool, some good adhesive. This is some Lucas stabilizer that I used for assembling the bikes. Sometimes you might need to clean something. I use the old carb cleaner. Q-tips come in handy for cleaning. Paper towels over there in the corner. Set of pliers one way or the other. An old style cloth filter wrench. Maybe some adapters. We have the the clutch tool if you can get it. If not, you can make up one by using an old clutch plate with a rod welded to it or bolted to it. 22mm, like I said, torque wrench. These are the basic tools that I use to work on this. If you have air, a good air tool comes in handy. These little torque tools work really well for pulling things apart too. You can get the adapters that will actually plug in here so you can accept the sockets. Just a miscellaneous part of these tools, and it's kind of nice to have this, but this is kind of an arrangement what I use to work on the engine. Now I made this picking tool. If you have an overhead area where you can pick a hoist or whatever, this really comes in handy. It's bent so that it'll fit to the frame, so you can get the engine back into place or get it out. I just went to the top motor mount area and made an adapter plate that everything fits to it. Here again, if you've got a buddy that can weld, that'd be great. If not, you could do the same thing here just by bolting this piece on and making it easy and putting a loop in it. So I happen to have some of these old rings, so I just welded this all up, but you can make it just a hook or whatever to get this engine out. They weigh about 150 pounds, so be aware of that. One of the other things was I made a flat plate and welded a tube to it. So this is basically what this is 3/4 inch and 3/4 tube slid into some 1.5 inch tubing. And it slides in nicely. I ended up welding on the back side a threaded area so I could screw it in, so I could tighten it down if need be, because this just unscrews out of here. It just keeps it in place, and when you're rotating the engine you can tighten that up and lock it down. Plus I also use like this dowel to hold the engine in a proper position when it's on its side because of the weight and everything. I just like to support it. This is just made so that it accepts the back, top, rear mount, and then I made a plate so it slides underneath the chain adjuster. So this all fits together. This will come off. I've also made in the past, here's another one I've made. This actually bolts to the rear lower and the center lower of the engine, and then will slide in place here, so I can do rotations on it that way. This was just easier because I knew I was going to take the bottom off. This is when you're assembling the upper end motor part. I have another one when the cylinder and head's off. I made this piece up, does the same thing, slides into this, has a locking screw, but this accepts this mount and the front mount, and that works only when the head and cylinders are off, so that if you were doing the same thing as I was doing there, working on the transmission, or putting the crank in and whatever, this is what I would use sometimes. Also, three other little items you might consider: the rubber hammer and your stator puller. These either screw in the new style stator or the old style for removing. If you buy the new charging system, the new PM, you would really want to get one of these pullers. They really help if you have to remove this stator off of there. If you have the old style, which would be this style of unit here, you definitely need the puller that screws onto the outside of this to help get those off, because they are set in there on a keyway, and this is difficult to get off. You don't want to pry in that area, especially if you're trying to save this and reuse it again. You definitely want to get by this tool. You can get both of them, I believe. You can either get them from TC Brothers, Mike's XS, and maybe even Hughes Hand-Built has this. I don't know if Hughes does or not, but I know Mike XS has them, and I believe that TC Brothers does. But these are really nice little tools to have to help make your day go much easier. So one thing that I have done, let's zoom up here, is that I have got a track. It's just an old barn track that I installed over the bench. I can lift heavy things onto the table if need be. This just lifts out this is an old sailboat harness system that I use. It's kind of nice. Pick this thing up. And just like that, it's on its rolling stand. It can be delivered to the bike now. And there you have it. Getting ready to put it in. I'm going to have to remove this unit from the back, and then we'll install it into the bike. That is the weight of the motor, minus oil and a couple of the side covers. One of the toughest things is getting these motors in and out of the frame. And it's nice to have a mechanical at hand And then once you get it in, one thing I did do, and I didn't show that right off, is that I put a wire tie here to hold my cabling up out of the way. So when I'm getting this aligned, everything will fit proper. There we go. And it's just a little bit of finessing. Get this all lined up in place. I've got the bolts on the other side, of course. This is kind of nice if you have a buddy helping you out. This little starter wire needs to go right there out of the way, so it'll fit in that little groove area of the back motor mount. And then I should be able to pry that up into place. The rubber mallet. That one's in. And now the rear's in. So now basically what we're going to end up doing is that we're going to go through and bolt everything back together again. I'll put the side case and everything on. One of the things I want to check just to make sure the starter's working properly, I will hit the start button, make sure that that's working. And I do it now before I put the cover on, because it's, once you fill it up with oil and everything else, I just want to see if it engages. So I will hook all this up and double check that. And this is the boring part, putting everything back together again, fitting stuff, making sure everything's going right. I still have some wiring to redo up here a little bit, but other than that, and I'll get back to you on the initial startup. Well, she's back together. Haven't started it yet, so let's see about getting this thing started. Fuel on, choke on, ignition on. I'm happy. It goes in first gear now, goes into second gear now, goes into third, fourth, and fifth, and downshift's nice. So that handled that problem that we had before with the shifting forks. Okay, one last thing before we go. I went and put in a new starter gear kit you can get from Mike's XS. It didn't work properly, and what I found out is that this clip that goes on the back side of it here didn't have enough resistance to help force this into gear. So what I ended up doing, these will pull off. I ended up taking this unit and putting it in the vise and squeezing it together so that it actually had some resistance. So the new one's in there. This is the old one. And actually there's probably nothing wrong with it. I just wanted to put in a new gear drive. This has a little bit of wear around here. But all in all, but that's one little trick. If you get a new one and it doesn't work properly, test it before you close up the case. You can hit that button and it should engage and flip up, because you're going to have to drain the oil and everything else to put this in. And usually you're in there changing clutches or whatever else that you want to do. So I hope this video has helped you. If you had some problems out there in the past and you kind of wanted to know what the inside of an engine looks like, well, you can see. It's not that difficult. You just take your time. Take a lot of pictures, so if you needed to go back and figure out where that part went or whatever, how it went in there. Get a good manual. I've got 3 that I go in between just for the heck of it. But anyway, thanks for watching, and this is Mr. Miyagi signing off. But before I say goodbye, please like, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you again soon. What we're going to do, I don't know, but we'll be back.